everybody. And the last thing on our agenda, as you can see on your phones, is the panel and discussion period. But right before we jump into that, I want to take a minute to give the floor to Kerry, who's here with us from Parks Canada, because all day we've been talking about ecological connectivity and different ecological connectivity initiatives on different scales. And we have an opportunity here that Mara's been kind enough to agree to tell us a little bit about the National Ecological Corridor Program right now that Parks Canada is working on. So I will give you the floor.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, thank you. Yeah, Kate and others were wanting me to give a full presentation, and we were still in the program development stage, but we are at a critical point in that program development, and I think in a few months we'll have some much more applicable and exciting news to announce. So I'll just start now by giving you a bit of background. So first, just thank you for inviting me and for being here. It's been great. I've really learned a lot. I'm inspired, by some of the actions and the collaborations that are being undertaken here at A2A. So in 2021, the federal government announced this new program. It was part of Nature Legacy 2.0, which was $2.3 billion over 5 years. And part of that was funding for the Ecological Corridor Program, run by Parks Canada, which is much smaller. It's $60 million. We don't, until 2026, there's no guarantee of funding after that, but we're optimistic. And if we can deliver some good results in this first 5 years, that'll help our case moving forward. So the overarching goal of the Ecological Corridor Program is to strengthen the integrity of our protected areas. And that's not just Parks Canada places, but all protected areas in Canada. So provincial, Indigenous, municipal, and other core habitat. So to create this network of connected protected areas. And corridors are one way to do that. There are other ways. Our focus initially will be in middle and southern Canada, because that's where most fragmentation is. In the north, things like larger protected areas may be a better way to protect connect habitats like we have in the far north. So the Convention on Migratory Species has defined ecological connectivity as the unimpeded movement of species and the flow of natural processes that sustain life on Earth. It is distinct from corridors, which are a tool to protect ecological connectivity. It's nothing new to this audience, I'm sure. Ecological corridors, like protected areas, are an area-based conservation approach with associated governance and planning mechanisms. The IUCN defines them as clearly defined geographic spaces, governed and managed over the long term to maintain or restore effective ecological connectivity. So these are definitions that are internationally agreed upon and have been adopted by the Parks Canada Ecological Corridor Program. Some of Parks Canada places are likely to form important anchors as part of a corridor, but as I said, we're looking at increasing connectivity by establishing corridors between all types of protected areas. And we will not own or manage these places. Don and many others today here have talked about collaboration. This is going to be collaboration on a scale like we have never seen before. To really establish nationally significant ecological corridors across this country is going to require interjurisdictional collaboration, coalitions of the willing, and much more. It's both exciting and kind of intimidating. So what's the best role for Parks Canada to play? It's a national program. We have a big country. Where are the best places to establish nationally significant ecological corridors? The issues of scale have been quite a challenge, and they've come up in some of the presentations and discussions here today. But it's really the local actors, you guys, and the knowledge holders that are in the best position to effectively translate the science into conservation action on the ground. Given the complexity of working across jurisdictions at a landscape scale, corridors are likely to be managed by, collaboratives, volunteer arrangements, and coalitions of the willing of all sorts. So what sort of tools and incentives do we need to support such arrangements? What can we learn from other countries and initiatives? The science of ecological connectivity and road ecology is exploding. I cannot keep up with the literature. It's very exciting, but we will never have all the information we want or need, and there's an urgency to act. So, with the best science we have to date, we've spent the last 18 months, couple of years developing our program. We've been modeling ecological connectivity with Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Connectivity Working Group, which was established under Pathway, to model ecological connectivity at the national scale using CircuitScape, both kind of a wall-to-wall analysis that was done by Richard Pither and company, and a park-to-park analysis. We're validating those analyses with real data as best we can. There is a paucity of movement data, I think, in Canada in certain taxa anyway. We've been engaging widely and consulting with experts, academics, Indigenous organizations, provincial governments, because they're going to be key in implementing ecological corridors moving forward. We've developed national criteria for the ecological corridor program, which are largely management and governance criteria. And while we've been doing that, we've supported several pilot projects to sort of learn by doing and start getting some action on the ground, including a small contribution to A2A to finish off the road ecology work, which we're very excited about. So, our program's at the national scale, and we anticipate that what we will end up doing as a result of our analysis will be identifying priority areas for ecological connectivity across the country. I don't know if there'll be 8 or 12, how big they'll be fuzzy boundary blobs across the country, within which local groups, regional actors will identify those sites that are best for an ecological corridor, depending on opportunity, threats, science, information. So that's kind of where the top-down federal work will meet with the grassroots bottom-up work. We need both, really, moving forward. So events like this one are so important. It's the first one I've been to since pre-COVID. It's really energizing, and thank you for including me. Advancing our learning and sharing our knowledge and support and collaboration across landscapes are going to be critically important to protect and restore ecological connectivity in Canada and beyond. Transboundary is going to be an important factor as well, like I mentioned. So I look forward to the upcoming panel. It's critically, it's going to be very apt and wonderful to hear the discussion, and please, the organizers know how to reach me. If you want more information about the program, just feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to give you some more, but I'll turn it over to the panel. Thank you.
Canada's ahead of us, but we're inspired by competition in the US, so So, okay. So our panel, first I'm just going to introduce our panel members and then just tell you about the structure of the panel. So some of these folks we've already been lucky enough to hear from today. So we have Carr, the Director of Strategic Conservation at the Nature Conservancy Canada, and Frantz, who's at Frantz Environmental, but has retired from the Department of Transportation in New York State. And then who's there? Ryan. You didn't sit in the order I wrote you down. Ryan Danby, who's the professor and the director of the School of Environmental Studies at Queen's University. And then Shelby, who we heard from earlier, who's a wildlands ecologist at the Northeast Wilderness Trust. And Marx, who's the Northeast Project Manager with the Wildlands Network. So thank you all for joining us today. And the first question that I'm going to ask, so the panel structure will be that I'm going to ask an opening question to the panel, and we'll see what their feedback and thoughts are on that. And then after that, we're happy to take questions from the audience. Any questions you have that you've been wondering all day, but preferably on a broad scale. And the theme of the panel, of course, is turning science into connectivity action. So how can we take all this wonderful science that's being done? As Mara said, we'll never have all the data. We have to transform it into action at some point. How do we do that? So everyone, maybe you don't want to ask a question, but on the center of your table are some note cards, hopefully. And so if you don't want to raise your hand and speak, you can write down your thoughts on that card and we'll collect them afterwards so that we have your feedback as well. Okay, so the first question I had for all of you, which I think it would be nice if each person answered this question, because you all have very different perspectives from your work. So is, from your perspective, what should the conservation community's priority be in the next 5 years to make a real on-the-ground difference in connectivity for wildlife? Who wants to start? Okay.
If you were in my session, I asked the question, how many engineers are in the room? How many planners are in the room? So what I'm just going to start with is, one of the biggest things, you need to broaden your audience, because the decision makers that are going to help make these things happen are not in this room. You're going to
hear you at the back.
I don't know if
that microphone's not working right now.
How about now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I'll repeat that. But what I was saying is the decision makers that are going to make things happen are not in this room. And having done this for my career, the opportunities vary everywhere you are. They don't exist the same everywhere. You may have I don't know what in New York State DOT we have a commissioner. And the commissioner is like the person that's going to help move things. In the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario, whatever that person is at level, it'd be nice if there was an agreement that they both recognize the importance of this effort. But you have to drive down into the engineers, you have to get into other levels of this. And what I got introduced to, everybody know about ICWET, anybody going to ICWET in Vermont in June? ICWET's the International Conference on Ecology and Transportation. Gary Evink was instrumental in Florida Panther. In 2001, he introduced me to ICWET, and I've been involved ever since, and I'm involved with a National Academy of Sciences, Transportation Ecology group. So I've gotten to meet a lot of people across the country. And I've never found better people than the people that are in this room and motivated. But what I've always found is you got to understand how things get done. And working at DOT, it comes down to getting it into the project. So I just want to mention a couple of things. And one of the things too is we don't have laws on this. Unless it's a threatened endangered species in New York or in other states in the US, it doesn't rise to any level unless you have local champions like yourselves that can get your word in. But a lot of times that doesn't work. Best thing would be is if we had laws, and again, I hate to say that, but like I've been involved with state wetland law, and that's broke. It's not really protecting wetlands the way it should or doing things. Been involved with invasive species, there's not enough laws for that. But frankly, if we didn't have laws for speed limits, nobody would drive the speed limit. So again, we need laws, but that's not happening. So you got to get to know who are the instrumental people in your zone of influence or where you are, wherever you are in the landscape trying to do this. And you have to continue that collaboration, but broaden it. Not just don't talk to the choir. The other thing too that I've been pushing is that the biggest priority we all have is bridges and culverts. So you need to know your bridge and culvert program, and you need to get into those programs. And in New York, I was able to push resiliency, bigger culverts, bigger bridges. You can put wildlife shelves in. You can put in, wild shelves on the ground in culverts. You could do things to make bridges better. Get rid of all the rock. If you were in my talk, Minnesota DOT is doing it. Every province, every state in the east, and I got friends in Virginia and Georgia have taken some of this information. They're doing it. But that's the lowest hanging fruit we all have for connectivity. So the next 5 years, everybody should get onto their DOTs and get them to implement it. I've been trying to get for 5 years at New York State, them to put it in the bridge manual, and it's like they're busy. Well, I'm finally out of government, so now I'm gonna start being a citizen and request to meet with the commissioner and ask, hey, where is that? You folks typically do not go and talk to anybody in those organizations, and you need to form groups to go in and talk, and you need to make a voice and be a face. So the other thing, just want to point out about that thing about bridges, there's a 75-year life cycle on most of these structures. You miss the opportunity, and that's what I've told the commissioner, it's like, don't miss the opportunity. It's cheap, we gotta do it. So that's my big thing on that. I'll have more ideas, I don't want to hog all the time, and so I'm gonna pass it on. You're next,
I'll maybe tag along on that, because I think influencers is a really big part of it, is understanding who your influencers are. As Mara was speaking, it just reminded me about one of the big things I would love to see in the next 5 years to try and instigate and propel more action, is you got your influencer that can really create the change, or group of influencers, but it's to change the dynamics from top down, bottom up, to make it equal, so that you may have a convener like Parks Canada that has the federal government funding to bring people together, and you can curate that based on who are those voices that you need to have in the room, transportation and others, and make it more equal. So it's side to side, cross-sectoral. It's not just like municipal up to federal. Everyone has a special talent and role to bring as a solution. So I think that's a conversation that's never happened in Canada. I think, and maybe this isn't the same in the US, is if you've got your corridor areas defined that need to be activated, convene cross-sectorally, like multi-government, but don't make it top-down, and have equal, honest conversation about what everybody can bring as part of the solution. I think that would bring a whole series of ideas, and new ideas and innovation, and incentivize participation. I think that may also be the case, particularly since a lot of non-governments and private sector and even industry, like think about incentivization from a different perspective.
There it is. Yeah, I think we're going to sound similar,
That's why I went next.
but I hope I can put a slightly different twist on it. I'm most familiar with New York State, not as much with Canada. But in our climate plan that was just adopted to reach our climate goals in New York, which are one of the most aggressive in the country, we included a requirement or a recommendation that priority conservation areas and priority development areas be developed statewide in New York State. New York State has also passed a 30 by 30 goal. So thinking the next 5 years is a great opportunity to advance this work through those two things. Working with regional agencies, communities, and state agencies to identify and make sure that priority conservation areas get included that reflect the needs of A2A. And making sure that 30 by 30 also reflects the lands that are important to A2A. Those are two state legislative mandates signed by the governor that are going to be really critical for the next 5 years and beyond in New York. I'm not sure about whether there's a parallel in Canada, but if there is, those are really, those two issues of biodiversity and climate are really going to be drivers over the next 5 years.
I work for a relatively small nonprofit land trust, and when I thought about this question, I thought, I don't think there's one single thing that every organization in this room should prioritize. I think it's really important that we all prioritize what we're good at, because I think there's danger to trying to sort of follow the shiny object, and I think that there's so many different expertise in here doing so many different things. You know, there are so many important pieces to make this kind of thing work. As a wilderness land trust, we really work on sort of the habitat stepping stones. We know those structures are really important under roads and things, but we know that they're even more important when there's protected habitat on either side. So I think my one sort of recommendation as a small nonprofit, which I think many people in the audience are, is to really lean into what you're good at and do it well and do it with passion and talk to leadership about it and talk to whoever will listen to you about it. And I think that's the important thing.
I'm supposed to come up with one priority, but I actually have two, Kate, sorry. But I would echo what people are saying here. It sounds like a simple question, but really when you start to think about it, you think of all the pieces that you need in place to make conservation work, and it's not necessarily one thing. But I would say I think of two priorities. One is protecting unprotected areas that require protection, and the other is restoring broken connections across the landscape, if I was to summarize that. I'm often asked, what is A2A? And I'll say, well, have you heard of Yellowstone, Yukon? Y2Y, oh yeah, I've heard of that, haven't heard of A2A. Or some people have heard of A2A, but I'll qualify it and say they're very different regions. When we talk about Y2Y, we're talking about these large wilderness protected areas in Yellowstone, Banff, Nahanni. And the areas between are generally publicly held land in large, quote-unquote, wilderness state. In A2A, we've got these big anchor parks, but the areas between there's a lot of privately held land, small parcels, residential, farms, etc. I think the land trusts are really crucial for that first step, protecting those unprotected areas. We don't have these opportunities to protect big 10,000 square kilometer areas in A2A anymore. We might be able to do that in aggregate though, and little pieces here and there, and that will help connectivity. And then restoring broken connections, things like overpasses and large underpasses and culverts and riparian corridors, and restoring ecosystems in those areas are sort of the on-the-ground work that various conservation organizations can do, sort of hands-on stuff. So those would be my two.
I'd like Ed Marx to say something about Wildlands Network's Eastern Wildways program and Eastern Wildways map, if you would, Ed.
Let me see a show of hands. Have any of you seen the Eastern Wildway map before? Okay, a few people have. What it represents, and John knows because he's walked a lot of it, not too many people can say that, is a connected landscape across eastern North America from the tip of Florida and the Gulf Coast to the boreal area of Canada. And it's a conceptual map, but based on reality on the ground, where there are existing protected areas and landscapes that retain enough of their natural character to potentially allow, with some restoration work, a landscape that would allow wildlife to move for their needs as well as in response to climate change. And what we would like to see is exactly what's happening here. The chunks of that connected landscape be taken on by groups, regional and local, to make it happen on the ground. And I'm very excited to see the work happening here, and there's work like this happening in other parts of that eastern wildway landscape. But I think in the Northeast where I work, I'm very happy to say it's probably one of the more active areas where there's this work going on. So you're part of something even bigger than the A2A landscape, something that's continental in scale. And I think when you talk to people and maybe show them that map and they understand that, it's really important to all of wildlife's future on this continent, because we don't know, we can't predict with any certainty how wildlife is going to have to adapt to climate change. We can give them the best chance we can, and connectivity and protected core areas that have a lot of microhabitats in them are the best chance that we can probably provide.
I have a question. We spoke today about the Global Biodiversity Framework, Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and I think that next step it's implementation of this global framework and its development of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. So my question is probably again to all panelists, how, on their opinion, the connectivity issues should be integrated in the national plans. Thank you.
I can take a first stab at that. What you were talking about also has a wonderful acronym, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans. They're called NBSAPs.
Yes.
And every signatory to the Convention for Biological Diversity in this Global Biodiversity Framework, they are responsible, every country is responsible for creating an NBSAP. In Canada, that implementation work is just underway. And my understanding is in May, there's going to be a first series of stakeholder talks that are going to be occurring. Connectivity is built into a number of those targets that I shared this morning. But I do think it's going to take the voice of groups like this to ensure that we see what's in those NBSAPs reflective of the kind of ambition and need that we have to see on the ground. Because it's those NBSAPs that drive funding, and it drives responsibility among the parties that need to deliver on the implementation side. So this is very, like, a personal opinion of mine, that those NBSAPs in the past have been too high level, not detailed enough. They don't create the kind of direction that has to be made in order to make a clear difference. So I just would recommend all of us in here to pay attention to that effort and really try and embed some really clear measurable results in the NBSAP that we in Canada need to produce by the next COP, which is next year.
But what about plants? Are there differences in the kind of thinking that needs to go into planning to allow for plants to move?
So just to repeat that question, Danny Baker is asking, are there any differences that need to be made in terms of connectivity planning for plants versus animals? Because we have talked a lot about animals today. So, yeah, we didn't have any plant talk. We should next time.
The only thing I can think of off the top of my head is that when you're doing restoration work, many people are starting to plant species from the next zone south in anticipation that they'll do better in the future than the species that may be there today. Or plant species at the northern end of the range. Right? Maybe it's not something that's not there now, but things that survive further south than where you're planting them now.
Just one thing, I'm on the New York State Flora Association, and one of the things, it's such a complicated issue, and there's not enough, again, resources, but emerald ash borer came through and took out green ash, black ash. Our forested wetlands, and you're having it here too, look completely different. I proposed bringing in shellbark hickory. We're on basically the eastern edge of the range. Eastern edge of the range.
We'll look at it.
Yeah, thank you so much. My wife's not here, and she usually does a good job. But it's a complicated issue. Even we were trying to do a whole seed thing in the Adirondacks, and little bluestem is a really common native prairie grass in the Adirondacks in a lot of places here in Canada, and big bluestem. But when you get seed source, you're getting it from South Dakota. Do you want to introduce that genotype? There's a lot of issues, and there's a lot of effort that needs to be looked at in this whole thing. So again, a complicated issue, but one, I agree with you, it's something that needs to be looked at.
It's a great point. There certainly are some things, in the transportation ecology group today, we focused on animals. Eco passages, these culvert passages under highways are not going to do anything for plants. I would argue that even overpasses are really not. I mean, pollination, pollen can carry in the wind, seeds can be dispersed and so forth, but connectivity and some of the strategies of protecting areas on a landscape and ensuring that areas are well connected will certainly aid in that. So there is some specific strategies that are aimed at animals and some more general strategies that are good for both animals and plants.
I'll just jump in to add that, well, one, spore dispersed plants probably aren't going to need our help because their spores can get everywhere in the wind, and they'll just grow where it works for them. So they'll probably be able to move as needed. And then seed dispersed plants are really often moved by animals. So connectivity for animals is probably the best thing we can do for plants right now, just in terms of getting their seed to the places that's going to be welcoming to them in the future.
Assume that I am one of the engineers who's not here. What would you say to me to explain why wildlife are important.
So that presentation I gave, that focused my presentations towards engineers. I don't usually come and speak as much to the choir because the choir kind of gets it. I've been doing that to DOT for years. Every year I'd give a presentation, but I'd also talk about the cost, the life cycle, why we can't afford to miss an opportunity. You know, you miss the bridge, that's an important, and again, I get the idea of priority. You gotta be careful too with priorities, because engineers hear priorities. I showed us culvert, Alder Brook, where in 1960, they basically created an aquatic connectivity barrier. But somebody didn't see that on a priority list, said, why do we need to do it? It's not on a priority list. It absolutely is a priority. You gotta be careful with priorities, but explain to the engineers that this can be done and they can be part of it, especially with resiliency. Most of the structures are getting bigger, and so it doesn't cost more. And what I have found with engineers, they love to get involved. You know, there's always gonna be a percentage that'll fight back or say, that's not my job, but a lot of you show them that they're part of the solution. We need you to help us create these designs that work, that also engineeringly work. You know, and so that's what I try to do is promote. They're so valuable to it, and we need you on the team. And I have found throughout my career that a lot of engineers want to be part of that. And you know, sometimes it's somebody above them say, we don't have time to do that, don't waste your time. I show them how to do these solutions easily. These things don't, when I'm talking about that bridge and culvert thing, that is the simplest thing we can be doing all across the country. And it's the highest and the best, you know, opportunity, because that's happening right now. There's a bridge program right now in Ontario that's probably going to go out this year. Where are they? Are they including wildlife connectivity? Are they doing aquatic connectivity? You know, that's what needs to be checked in with people in this group. And that's what, even in New York, we need to say, what did you do? You did 20 bridges this year. How many did you just put rock everywhere? Did you make any wildlife passes? So I explain that and I show how it's easy to do. And most of the stuff doesn't cost as much as people think it does. And a lot of times I show how it saves money.
I might add on to that, not maybe from an engineering perspective, but what drives the engineers to want to create that kind of change. Ryan, you told me I'm a really optimistic person, and this might show my optimism, but I'm watching what happens internationally around. There's a task force for nature-related disclosures. Businesses are going to need to start, I think it's inevitable, it's coming down the pipe, that businesses are going to have to start disclosing their impact on nature. And so I think the way our economy is going to be working in the future, hopefully, this is part of the change that we need to see, is that there's going to be pressure on engineers and municipalities and the way we use our road systems and others to redesign the way that we do them so that we're not having such an impact on nature, because it's not in the interest from an ESG perspective for businesses. They're starting to calculate those ESGs differently so that they're taking into consideration climate and biodiversity loss. And all those conversations are happening right now, so I don't know what they're going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years, but it's going to be different and in a better way, I think, than what we see it is today. So that's my optimistic view.
Nice.
Yeah. I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. I saw you had your hand raised here.
I'm just trying to think of the study that Ryan outlined around the roadkill study and all of these things where we're identifying hot spots along the road, and some of the opportunities for improving in my practice or in my experience has come when there's been some kind of a natural catastrophe or a bridge or a culvert has failed, and that presents an opportunity to go back and do it right. With those sort of 2 ends of the spectrum in mind, I'm wondering if some of the studies that are being done on the road, say what I call the roadkill studies, that are looking at identifying spots of vulnerability, for lack of a better word. Are there any parallel studies either in the works anywhere or planned that look at some of the infrastructure challenges that are out there, say on the Parkway? And when is that infrastructure either due for rehabilitation, or if there is an opportunity where that culvert or bridge or chunk of road gets wiped out, can we then go in and establish whatever the mitigation measure is? So some of the things are driven by cost effectiveness. I mean, there's a wildlife corridor, I think, on Highway 400 south of Sudbury, between Sudbury and Kerry South. That would never have gone in if there wouldn't have been if Highway 400 would have been constructed. So there's an opportunity there to provide that structure. If we were to go on the parkway and say, we need this corridor here right now, it's not cost effective, it's coming out of the blue. But I'm just trying to get ahead of the planning notion. And are there any studies that we can do where we're not just looking at wildlife and the challenges they face, but we're also looking at the opportunity side in terms of if we could mitigate this, when is that opportunity likely to arise? So it'd almost be like an inventory of infrastructure, and you were mentioning the 75-year lifetime of a bridge or a culvert or something. So do we know where do those infrastructure points intersect with the hot spots? And therefore, where are the opportunities for us to start making some gains towards mitigating the fragmentation that's going to happen?
I think this is one opportunity where we can learn a little bit from what Staying Connected has done in the state of Vermont. I don't get to the Staying Connected meetings as much as I'd like to, but the Vermont Department of Transportation is part of Staying Connected, and they bring their maintenance schedules to those meetings, and they meet with people who are doing the kind of hotspot analysis work, and they say, okay, we're replacing the culvert on this road this year. Have you guys identified that as something important? And as a result of that collaboration, the corridor that I was talking about at lunch that I walked, Route 12, which is a Vermont state highway that gets a fair amount of traffic, has, I think, 4 or 5 structures being replaced this year, and this year and next year, and they're doing all of them in a much more wildlife friendly way because they've been involved in Staying Connected, and because Northeast Wilderness Trust just protected 6,000 acres on one side, and there's 12,000 acres of state land on the other side, so they know that this is a critical corridor. So it's about getting those voices in the room, and Staying Connected is a good example of an organization that is similar to A2A, where they've built that relationship with their local DOT. You, of course, have to do it in 2 countries, but it's a good model.
Just want to add one thing on that. In the Adirondack Park, through created travel corridor, unit management planning, and we came up with a concept called PALs, priority action locations. It could be some hotspot in the basin that's got to be addressed. It could be a connectivity location. It could be a culvert that's a barrier. There's no good inventory and asset management system. They'll have like where the guide rails, where a sign is, but that information needs to be in all the DOTs, and that information could be, when they're screening, they go to that GIS database, and we worked with Esri and created it's going to be a public facing. It's not right now. DOT still has it internal, but it'll be public facing. And people could provide information and say, hey, I got something on up in the Adirondack, somebody emailed me about wildlife being hit. Well, that information could be put there and be front and center. So those interfaces are important. You also have to understand what laws might affect that future decision. In 2013, I was at Ecological out in Arizona. It was 120 degrees. I got off the plane and we had a flooding event in New York, and it was called the Mohawk Valley Flooding Event. The governor said, DOT, you'll handle everything. We did 600 sites. I got a sign for all the environmental stuff. We tried to upgrade culverts, but the FEMA regulations would not let us put a culvert in any bigger than what existed. And I'm fighting FEMA on sites, and why are we doing this? Long and the short on this is they have changed the regs because of this. And that was the biggest event ever done by one. You'll hear things like what happened down in New York City, but DOT did all the sites, 600 sites. We then got $3 million to go back and fix stuff. So understand in your ministry or wherever you are, is there a mechanism to do it right when that opportunity comes? Because you might know where it is, and they'll say, sorry, we got to go, we're building it, see you in 75 years. So think of that too in the overall process. But a good point, and then also that good point about meeting with DOTs. Everybody here could ask in a group, say, can we look at your program? Can we come in and sit down? That doesn't have to happen at a conference. People can do that. Say, I'd like to see the program. What's on your radar?
I don't mean to point out the obvious, but wouldn't the DOT be the perfect organization to identify where these things need to go in the first place? They're the ones who are cleaning the carcasses off the highways, and they see that the turtles could be going underneath it, but there's a culvert problem, or that there's a dead skunk there, and if you've got protected land on one side of the road and protected land on the other side of the road, you've got a lot of dead animals in between them. So they could actually go into not just the engineering problem solving, but the identification that goes into the problem solving, so they can identify what needs to be done. I'm not trying to cut out the activists, but I'm saying it sounds like a good idea that the DOT be involved in the identification and the mitigation.
Did everybody hear that question? But essentially, DOT, why is DOT's not doing that inventory and asset management element of it? And I'll just tell you that I worked in 5 regions covering the Adirondacks and Catskills. It was a special position. The department got sued. My position was created to deal with common practices from road salt to wildlife to invasive species to whatever. We have 11 regions in DOT, and maintenance doesn't talk that well to design. Design is working on the capital program. Construction doesn't want to hear from design. We got it, we'll take it, we'll build it. There's a lot of turf, and it's not just New York State. I know DOTs all across the country. Turf is big. And what I've often heard, because I've asked that question, like, well, we should be doing this, and we did in the park. We started the leading. People say, that's not our job. That's your Department of Environmental Conservation. They should do it. And you go to DEC, they don't have staff to do it. So unfortunately, that is one of the barriers that has to be dealt with, is somebody has to take the lead. And that's where I say it'd be great if you could get commissioner level people talk and say, we agree, and this is our role, this is your role. That's all gets spelled out. But every time an administration change, a person leaves, things change again. So it's good to get things in paper and writing and establish those responsibilities. Government owes it to the public. Fortunately, I've worked with government for over 30 years, and a lot of times they don't realize the public is their customer. I can say those things now. I would have got slapped bad a year and a half ago.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. I do want to respect the venue's timeline as well. So the next thing, I just want to close up the panel by thanking all of the panelists. We really appreciate you being willing to lend your perspectives to everybody's questions. I'm sure there's a lot more questions, and we are going to have a little closing by Helena, who's back with us now, and then we are going to proceed after that to for everyone who can stay, please join us next door to check out the posters, the tables if you haven't already. There'll be drinks for purchase and others. So
loads and loads of fabulous appetizers.
Okay, so stop by. But before that, we'd like to welcome back Helena to close our symposium today.
Awesome. I wish I could have been here for more, because these last comments, you know, I grew up in the Sault Ste. Marie area. We are from the Robinson Huron Treaty area, and we are a pre-Confederation treaty from 1850, and so there's a lot of history up there, you know, 1600s and more, and, you know, and how you say that people recognize, you know, we would only express ourselves in flora and fauna as Indigenous people in our artwork and in our songs and in our stories, and being from a border town too, you know, Sault Ste. Marie and Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And so that Jay Treaty that crosses us, which is an imaginary line that was created in Europe when in 1700. And so great stories of our history up there, and it makes me think of that when I come to these kinds of things. And I was thinking, do I know a song that attacks Canada and the U.S.? I think I do. Never without, right? And I'm grateful for my life today. And, so I made these little things. I made these for kids and paint them with strawberries and stuff, because we don't want to see the kids running around with sticks in the rattles. And so, you know, Buffy St. Marie, we have a lot to thank her for, and she is on the board of our governors of the Down Wenjack Fund. And so, you know, why I couldn't be here with you today was, you know, every hour I have a meeting, and we also have been working on the Downey Wenjack site, and we also have a TP project on the go. And so, you know, doing these things is really important so that we have innovation and more ideas and new products and stuff to offer our students and new people who want to come here and use our facilities, as well as, you know, share your message. And because I think we all kind of want the same thing. And so Buffy and other great singers, like, at the conference we'll be talking about Robbie Robertson, and, and his great music as a Mohawk from over there in Caledonia as a nation. So we relate to that and we go back to that, and just like how you're trying to rebuild, even our Cornwall campus in Akwesasne with the revitalization with the St. Lawrence Seaway and what happened there when it expanded, and those lost villages and everything. So there is really a lot to talk about. And one of the great things to talk about here is the Algonquin land claim, which has been in for how many years now, and what does the government owe you? I like how you said that, because, what does the government owe, even to those people, is recognition of their lands. And they do get up there and say that you're on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. And so we need to recognize these things. And so Buffy has a song which includes Canada and the US, because she started out her young life up in Peguis, which is north of Winnipeg there, and she's Cree, and she ended up in the US after her parents died. And so she claims, that she had great opportunity when she ended up in Greenwich Village singing her songs and such. And same with Robbie Robertson when he went to Los Angeles, and, when we talk about all of this music. And so please join in with me with this song, because many of you will know it. And it's called Darling, Don't Cry. I'm just going to try and play these little kid rattles with it, okay? Ha ha ya, hey ha, ya ha ya, hey ha, hey ha, hey ha, hi-ya, we-ya, hey, hi-ya. Hey ha, hey ha, hi-ya, we-ya, hey. Hey ha, hey ha, hi-ya, we-ya, hey. We-ya, hey, ha, hi-ya, we-ya. Met him on a powwow trail. He was singing and I was a dancer. To the heartbeat drum, way, way, yeah. Long summer nights, falling in love. Don't ever wanna part, don't ever wanna say goodbye. Hi, 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 hey, hey, oh, yeah, hey. Yeah, hi, hi, hey, hey, oh, yeah, hey. Hey, hey, ha, hi, we, hey. Hey, hey, ha, hi, we, hey. Hey, hey, ha, hi, we, hey. We, hey, hi, we, darling, don't cry when I leave the USA. 'Cause if you like, I'll take you home. When I go back to Canada, oh yeah, oh yeah, hey, hey, oh yeah, hey, yeah, 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 hey, oh yeah, hey, 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 ha, hey, 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 ha, hey, hey. Hey, hey, ha, hey, 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 hey,